Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London for your international news around the world in 5. US President Donald Trump has condemned the latest violence in cities across the United States after nearly a week of protests that was sparked by the death of African-American George Floyd. On Twitter, he turned on his opponent in the next election, Joe Biden, after he was pictured at one of the protests saying, "Sleepy Joe Biden's people are so radical left that they are working to get the anarchists out of jail and probably more. Joe doesn't know anything about it. He is clueless, but they will be the real power, not Joe. They will be calling the shots. Big tax increases for all, plus." Curfews have been imposed in nearly 40 cities in an attempt to suppress rioting, but people have largely ignored them. Riot police have clashed with protesters in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia and Los Angeles, firing tear gas and pepper bullets to try to disperse the crowds. Police vehicles were set on fire and shops were raided in several cities. The police weren't always battling demonstrators, though. Here in New York City, officers got on one knee in solidarity with protesters. There were also rallies in London, Berlin and Toronto, where people marched on government buildings calling for justice for George Floyd and an end to racial discrimination. Meanwhile, Zimbabwe has summoned its US ambassador on Monday over remarks by a senior American official accusing the Southern African country of stirring anti-racism protests over the death of George Floyd. In an interview with ABC News, US National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien referred to Zimbabwe as a foreign country using social media to stoke unrest and sow discord. Zimbabwe's foreign ministry said US Ambassador Brian Nichols had been called to explain O'Brien's remarks. The number of coronavirus cases worldwide has reached 6 million as the disease has rapidly spread across Latin America. Confirmed COVID-19 infections in Latin America have surged past 1 million, with Brazil leading the pack. Despite an increase in cases, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has continued to defy social distancing recommendations. The country is preparing to ease quarantine restrictions, despite warnings from public health experts who say the worst is still to come. History has been made as 2 NASA astronauts have safely boarded the International Space Station after docking their SpaceX Crew Dragon craft.
Falcon stage separation confirmed.
This launch by the private rocket company SpaceX has marked the first time that a private entity, rather than NASA, has carried Americans into orbit. It is also an important milestone for reusable rockets that SpaceX pioneered to make spaceflight less costly and more frequent. The tropical storm Amanda has killed at least 14 people in El Salvador as heavy rains have caused floods, landslides and power outages. El Salvador President Nayib Bukele has declared a 15-day state of emergency to cope with the effects of the storm, which he estimated to have caused $200 million worth of damage. India has partially restored train services amid reports of chaos and overcrowding at some stations. At least 145,000 people travelled on trains on Monday as the country starts to reopen after a prolonged lockdown. 200 trains will now start operations, up from the existing 30 that are currently running. But maintaining social distancing and cleanliness is proving to be a difficult task. India's mammoth railway network usually carries 25 million passengers every day. Near the Somali capital of Mogadishu, at least 6 people have been killed after a minibus was hit by the blast from a roadside bomb. The vehicle's passengers were travelling from the capital to a funeral in a nearby town when it hit the explosive at Hawa Abdi village, about 19 kilometres from Mogadishu. Britain's Queen Elizabeth has been photographed horse riding in the grounds of Windsor Castle, marking the first time that she has been seen outside since the coronavirus lockdown began. The Queen has been living at Windsor Castle during lockdown with her 98-year-old husband, Prince Philip. From there, she has issued a number of rallying messages to the nation, including televised addresses that have been a rarity during her 68-year reign. And finally, the Zimbabwean film Cook-Off, a romance about a struggling mother who finds love during a cooking competition, has premiered on Netflix. The makers of the film hope that this debut will propel Zimbabwe's small film sector to global audiences. The film's producer said that Zimbabwe often grabs headlines for its economic difficulties and political crises, but hopes that this film will help to project a different image to international audiences. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel Studios in Lagos.